Okay, we are on air. Welcome to everyone watching us on the internet. Welcome to everyone watching us in Madrid. And welcome to everyone being with us here in Stockholm, here at the Norrsken House. This is the 5th day of the Nordic Climate Action Weeks. And we are doing it for you here at Norrsken, we being the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Council. And together with We Don't Have Time and Global Utmaning, we bring this to you all over the world, and we're very happy about that. And we will start this evening's show with a brief from the negotiations table in Madrid. Before we do that, I will just remind you over there and you here that you should be active on social media while you listen to us. And please, when you are, use our hashtag Nordic Climate Action Week. Nordic Climate Action, that is. But now, I will give the word over to Madrid. Today, we have a guest from Sweden on stage there, together with my colleague Mats Lindqvist. This is the head of delegation from Sweden. Du heter Mattias Frumerie. Mattias will be speaking Swedish in part of his speech today, but we have also told you that we want to have part of your speech in English. So I think you will start in English and then continue in Swedish, and we will take questions both in Swedish and in English, and that goes both for Madrid and for you who are here in Stockholm. But now, Mats, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and very welcome to Madrid, you in Stockholm, and you in here in our active audience in Madrid. And as Mary said, we start in English, and then we shift to Swedish after a few questions. But Mattias, we go right to the point. Do you have any breaking news or some good news from the negotiations today here at COP25?
Well, thanks very much for having me here. First of all, just to say, I think this is a fantastic opportunity to link up with Stockholm and hopefully a number of viewers online as well. On the breaking news, I'm not sure whether a breaking news, but I think it's fair to say that negotiations are heating up a bit. We're already in the 5th day, almost completed the first week already. And as you know, we need to be ready with the kind of our work on Monday, basically, when ministers start arriving on Tuesday. So it's just a couple of more days to go. I think it's fair to say that the issues which we foresee to be consensus are also the ones which are difficult. It's Article 6, it's the issue of loss and damage, and it's just the sort of the more overall issue of ambition.
Can I just ask you also, what are your expectations in this stage of the negotiations? Can you say something about that?
Well, I would have hoped that we would have come further than we have. I mean, I think that we should have been able to resolve a couple of more issues now that we have Friday evening.
Can you say something more specific what those issues are, or are they too technical, or?
Well, I think the 3 issues I outlined, which would be sort of the main, some of the bigger negotiation issues, and I think there we would have expected and hoped for a bit more progress on those issues, but also on some of the other issues which we're discussing, where we could have. I would have hoped that we would have come further than we have. For example, on finance, there are a number of reporting tables we're discussing as well, where I would have hoped that we would have come further.
Can you say just shortly why we haven't come further than this?
Well, you know, I'm speaking then on behalf of the EU. We want to be constructive, so you should talk to others. You know, why haven't we come further?
Okay, thank you very much, Mattias. And now I think we switch over to Swedish. I think that many people here in Madrid, in this audience, also understand Swedish, so please stay put. There might come some more English a little bit later. And if you don't know if you can't speak Swedish, you might even get some words because Swedish and English have many words which are very similar. But över till Stockholm igen.
Är det jag som ska ta över nu, så säger jag Mattias, du får gärna berätta för oss vad som gläder dig och vad som oroar dig efter dag 5.
Det som gläder mig är det stora engagemang som jag tycker vi ser liksom i hela möteslokalen, inte bara i själva förhandlingarna. Det finns en stor vilja, upplever jag, i förhandlingsarbetet. Alla parter engagerar sig, man försöker hitta lösningar. Men det finns ju också hela den här ytan utanför förhandlingsrummen, där vi ser ett stort engagemang från ungdomsrörelsen, men från företag, från olika civilsamhällesorganisationer som visar på ett stort engagemang och också skapar förväntningar på oss i förhandlingsrummen att vi också ska leverera resultat. Och jag tycker det är någonting som är väldigt bra.
Det var det som gladde dig, och vad oroar dig?
Det oroande är väl just det att de förväntningar som finns från aktörer utifrån kanske inte kommer att kunna återspeglas i de beslut som vi kommer att ta nästa vecka.
Och nu hörde jag att du vill vara väldigt diplomatisk och inte säga vem det är som är besvärlig här. Men kan du åtminstone lite förklara för oss som sitter och väntar på resultat nu vad det är som gör att när ni har samlats där och alla i princip vill samma sak, att det kan vara så svårt att enas?
Jag tror att det är 2 dimensioner i det. Det ena är att faktiskt kanske inte alla vill samma sak. Och det andra är att de regelverk som vi ska utforma ibland måste då anpassas utifrån de nationella förutsättningar som olika länder och grupper har, och att det därför kan ta ganska lång tid ändå att komma överens om de regelverken. Det är ju det fina med Parisavtalet, att det bygger på liksom alla länders egna ambitioner och det man vill uppnå. Och ska vi då kunna utforma globala regelverk så behöver vi också se till liksom att de olika hänsyn eller de olika förutsättningar som länder kan ha också beaktas i det regelverk som vi vill utforma. Men samtidigt som vi då också vill från europeisk och svensk sida att vi vill se så regelverk som möjliggör ambition så långt som möjligt. Så att det kan vara en ganska besvärlig balans att försöka hitta ett sådana regelverk som faktiskt tar om hand om olika synpunkter som kan finnas från alla parter som är med.
Men tycker du, om jag skjuter in här nu från Madrid, tycker du att hur är det med atmosfären inne i själva förhandlingarna? Är det som mycket motstånd till de ambitioner som Sverige har, som Norden har, som är ändå ganska höga? Och även inom EU, finns det liksom ett stort motstånd bland en stor del av deltagarna för att driva igenom så höga krav och så höga ambitioner som då Norden och EU har?
Jag tror att en reflektion kring det mer övergripande är väl att just när vi ska utforma de här regelverken så måste vi också beakta att många utvecklingsländer inte minst kanske har bristande kapacitet. Det finns en bristande institutionella förutsättningar för att kunna etablera de regelverk som vi skulle vilja ha. Och då blir det också kanske motsättningar när man ska ta fram de här gemensamma reglerna. Och att det kanske inte alltid beror på att det finns olika ambition i vad vi vill uppnå. Inte minst så tycker jag man kan se från många utvecklingsländer att det finns en hög ambition i det vi vill uppnå. Vi hade ju till exempel idag en dialog just om anpassningsfrågor, där många utvecklingsländer just ger uttryck för att man vill kunna ha en hög ambition, men att det också finns många utmaningar för dem i att kunna ha det. Så att där finns det ju också inskrivet i både klimatkonventionen och Parisavtalet att vi som utvecklade länder har ett ansvar att kunna bistå utvecklingsländer i att de ska kunna ta sitt ansvar. Och jag tycker vi från svensk sida kan vara väldigt stolta över det som vi gör i vårt klimatbistånd till exempel, där vi nu bara i år vi har annonserat en fördubbling av vårt bistånd vårt stöd till Gröna klimatfonden. Vi har ingått 4-åriga avtal med både anpassningsfonden och fonden för de minst utvecklade länderna som vi som första land har gjort. Och det här är någonting som också exekutivsekreteraren själv har uppmanat oss till att uppmuntra andra länder till. Så att det vill jag verkligen passa på tillfället att göra här också. Att uppmuntra andra till att gå in i den typen av avtal som ger långsiktiga förutsättningar för finansiering.
I'm going to ask something in English now so that we don't lose our English-speaking audience. You mentioned young people, and you mentioned that it is inspiring that you get this input from younger people. But how do you think that young people will react if you don't reach what you have set out to reach?
I'm afraid that young people will be disappointed even if we reach what we set out to reach, to decide next week. And I think the kind of expectations they have, which has been manifested so many times during the past year, not least, shows us that their expectations are much higher on us than we would be able to deliver at this point.
But as head of delegation, and you have been, this is not your first COP. So as head of delegation, would you say that the situation this year in the negotiation is different compared to previous years because of the activity from young people?
Well, as you said, my experience is this process is rather short compared to many other colleagues. But the impression, I guess, is definitely that the voice of youth has changed the tone of conversation. Maybe not all the way into negotiation rooms themselves, because as we discussed, we are very much into sort of technical details on rules when in the actual negotiation rooms. But I think sort of the conversation at large very much is influenced by the voice of youth.
But I must admit that I can sense in many of the young people I talk to that the fact that you say that their voice has not reached into the negotiation rooms, that might create some frustration, let me use that word. Isn't that something, I mean, what is needed in order for the voice to get all the way into the rooms?
I think it's probably fair to say that youth are not the only frustrated actors in this process, but there are many of us who would want to see even higher ambition from the negotiating rooms and up into decisions when we're going into 2020, especially when countries all of us are to be presenting our new and updated NDCs, which need to be sort of signaling and portraying the kind of higher ambition we need to see in order to bend the emissions curve.
Yeah, what about Mary? Do you? Yeah, you have one more question.
Säg bara.
No, just på svenska kanske då, eftersom jag riktar mig till Stockholm. Men har ni någon i publiken där som vill ställa några frågor, så vore det kanske tid för det nu. Ja, publiken i Stockholm, har ni frågor? Här finns en möjlighet, ja. Här har vi en fråga. Varsågod, säg gärna vem du är.
Hej Mattias, Ingela Svedin här, baserad i Jerusalem vanligtvis. Tack snälla för din spännande dragning. Min fråga handlar lite grann om NDC:erna som inte tekniska verktyg, men som jag förstod det lite grann som tillitsbärare och transparensverktyg egentligen, för att kunna förstå hur allihopa kan bidra till både de mål som behöver göras och var och ens bidrag till det här. Och har du några reflektioner kring hur den diskussionen kring demokratisering och tillitsengagemang, om det har hjälpt till eller om det finns annat som kan behöva göras för att NDC eller liknande mekanismer också skulle kunna hjälpa till med den mindre tekniska biten utan mer deltagande demokratibasen.
Tack Ingela, hej, vad kul att se dig. Jättebra fråga. Jag nämner gärna ett exempel där och lyfter fram NDC-partnerskapet som Sverige är med både stöttar och är engagerat i på olika sätt, som är ett initiativ för att kunna stötta utvecklingsländer att ta fram sina NDC:er. Och där vi inom ramen för NDC-partnerskapet också försöker se till att länder när de tar fram sina NDC:er gör det i en så pass inklusiv process som möjligt. Och inte bara då liksom att man tänker sig på liksom horisontell nivå att man försöker få med så många olika perspektiv som möjligt, utan även om man kallar det vertikalt, att man liksom tittar på hur jobbar vi på nationell nivå, regionalt och lokal nivå. Så att, och också kunna se till att olika aktörer i civilsamhället och näringslivet är med och delaktiga i processen att ta fram NDC:erna. Det är väl många också som säger att liksom den första generationens NDC:er som togs fram under ganska stor brådska, och att de NDC:er som vi ska ta fram under nästa år blir då ett tillfälle att, precis som du säger, att se till att det blir en inklusiv process, att så många som möjligt får komma till tals i arbetet med att ta fram NDC:erna, och att de ska vara just liksom både ett tekniskt ramverk för landets omställning och liksom att det visar på den typen av åtgärder man vill göra, men att det också finns att det har varit en process där de olika aktörer som behöver vara delaktiga i genomförandet också finns med i framtagandet. Och det där ytterst är det upp till länderna själva att liksom styra hur den processen ska se ut. Men jag tror att vi från svensk och EU:s sida är angelägna om, precis som du säger, att den processen ska vara så inklusiv som möjligt.
May I suggest that we take one more question in Madrid if you have anyone who wants to ask something, and then we need to finalize this discussion.
Have to wrap it up because there will be another event in a few minutes, so we have to get to the end before that. But do we have one question here in Madrid? If we have, we take it very quickly. If we do, there is one. Yes, we take one, and quite fast, please.
Kai Turek at Max Burgers here. What do you think is most hard to agree on in Article 6?
That was a short.
That was a very short and very easy question.
Yeah, it was.
I think, as always in these discussions, it's going to be a package deal, and the two, just very briefly, the two difficult issues on what we call double counting and transfer of pre-2020 units, I think is going to be the two tough ones to agree on.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think that we wrap it up from Madrid. And
I take over here.
Give over to you to just say the last words.
And my last words are stay put, because in 5 minutes we will continue with our next event. Thank you very much for this report, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
And welcome back, all of you over there in Madrid and in the world, and welcome back also you here in Stockholm. We are continuing our evening here at Norrtjärn House, and we are doing it by going to discuss consumption of food and what it means and how important it is when it comes to climate questions. And we have two moderators for this evening's discussion. And now let me look at my paper so that I get this right. Irene Blomqvist and Jonas Färgeman. That's your turn now.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody in Stockholm, and welcome. Hello, everybody in Madrid, and welcome. As Mary just said, my name is Jonas. I'm from Regeneration 2030, as well as Irene and the rest of our hosts who are running around taking lovely pictures. Today, we're going to talk about sustainable food consumption and with the path to reach the goal of sustainable food consumption that we all strive to hit. Regeneration, very short, is an organization that is youth-led by the Nordic and the Baltic Sea region areas, or youth from those countries. We facilitate the SDGs agenda to be pushed further and harder by the young, by the youth. We facilitate this by pushing some companies and helping and facilitating others, as well as private people, individuals in both the public and private sector. Sure.
Yes. So, and as Jonas said, today's session is going to be about food consumption, sustainable food consumptions, and the actions that we are doing to achieve that. And speaking of actions, Regeneration has this campaign going on social media. So please go into @Regeneration 2030 and look at our stories, so then you can make your own food pledge. So it's based on the Planetary Health Diet and what you can do as a consumer to drive a more sustainable food consumption era. So please do that, and remember to tag us in your photo. So first of all, oh yes, and also we really want this to be a very engaging and interactive session. So all in the audience, please do ask questions whenever. You can just signal us somehow that you want to ask or comment or contribute with your knowledge. That's totally fine whenever, so please do that. And maybe you can also move a little bit closer if you feel like it once we get started. So now we'll go over to Madrid, to Tatiana, and she can update us a little bit of what's going on this topic there.
Oh, we can't hear you right now. So just hold on a second, Tatiana, and we'll set you up.
Okay.
Sorry?
Yes,
There
now
you
you're good.
Okay. Okay, hello everyone. Nice to meet you, and thank you for raising this issue, because actually sustainable consumption is not one of the priorities of COP25. As we all know, the priorities for COP25 are economic mechanisms of implementation of the Paris Agreement and raising national ambitions in terms of NDCs and fossil fuels as well, but not sustainable consumption. However, we had a few sessions on this issue. So namely, the day before yesterday, there was a session on transforming food systems under changing climate. And participants discussed the whole issue of the food systems, beginning from agriculture and sustainable land use and ending with sustainable packaging and sustainable consumption. So there were a lot of ideas, and maybe one of the interesting ideas was that we should create incentives for companies to measure food loss and waste. So we should create some mechanisms so that companies would be interested in that, maybe economically, and that should be implemented in their business models. And we also have a number of companies that manufacture food in a sustainable way. Most of them are from Europe. And actually, they also help the consumers to consume their goods sustainably through providing for sustainable packaging and through other things. But I think that's all that we have here at COP25 on sustainable consumption.
Cool.
All right, thank you very much, Tatiana, and we'll try to incorporate you during the discussion again, so be ready with more golden words.
Okay, thank you.
With that, we'll now like our panelists to join us on stage. Our panelists are Mr. Henrik Hansson, co-founder and COO of Klimato. Welcome. We have Marie Persson, project officer at the Nordic Council of Ministers. Yay. We have Afton Halloran, external consultant at Nordic Food Policy Lab. Yes. We have Amanda Wood, researcher at Stockholm Resilience Center. And we have Elin Aronsson Bays, from Fruit Loops.
Great, so thank you so much everyone for joining us today. So our focus is going to be on solutions and actions that we can take to make more sustainable food systems and how we can consume foods more sustainably. And we would like to start by asking everyone in the panel, why food? Why did you get into this? Why do you want to solve this specific question? Maybe we can start with Henrik.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so obviously the food industry accounts for, I think it was a report that came out last week, which showed that the food industry accounts for 27% of global CO2 emissions. And I think that basically says it all. And what we're doing at Klimato is that we're calculating and communicating carbon emissions from the food industry. And we basically want to give the information to the consumers and to the restaurants and the food service providers to give them the information to make informed decisions when it comes to this. So I think the number of 27% says most of it, actually.
Yes, thank you. Marie?
Well, it would be the same comment for me, actually, just thinking about the large impact that food has, not only on climate change, but also when we look at broader ecosystem impacts and environmental impacts. So that's kind of the trigger, I think. But it's also a very positive way into talking about a systems transformation, because food relates to, it's something that we do 3 times a day. It's one of those actions that you can take that actually, is meaningful in the everyday life. So it's kind of a positive way to think about a systems transformation, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, so I grew up on a farm. I grew up in the countryside, and this was a part of my childhood. So being engaged in the food system from kind of day one, and knowing that kind of not everyone has this kind of access to understanding what sustainable food systems look like and what that can be, that's what for me it has been kind of the main driver from a very young age. And luckily, kind of following that intuition and knowing that this would be the right path to go down, finally food is getting the attention that it deserves. So I'm really happy to see that, and I'm really happy that I listened to myself, kind of embarking on a scientific journey into this, and as well as a career journey into looking at food and sustainability.
Thank you.
For me, I started researching food more from the nutrition and health angle and was very interested in that, thought that would be my entire career. And then quickly realized that you can't separate food into its impacts on health and its impacts on the planet. And then the point was really driven home when I joined the Stockholm Resilience Center, and their belief is really that all human activity is founded on a sustainable planet, really. We must have that. If we don't have that, then there's not a lot of point focusing on what our health and nutrition should be. So I think just this holistic and, as we've been saying, systems view has become very, very important for me.
Great. Elin?
Hi, thanks for having me here. Well, I started my company Food Loops about 3 years ago with quite some knowledge from the food retail industry where I worked previously, where I learned the value of food being wasted, how great the food that is being wasted really is, and I felt that someone had to do something about it. And since I saw the food behind the consumers, like on a warehouse level or farming level, that's where I wanted to put my focus. So I started Food Loops, a digital marketplace, B2B, which was a very hard lesson learned. I almost quit my company this summer, but quickly realized that I wanted to continue with my passion for food waste and trying to solve that issue. So now I'm a food waste consultant. And I love the word act that is everywhere, because that's what my company is about now. I want to help companies to take action towards a more sustainable company.
Yes, thank you all so much. And as you all in the audience maybe have noticed now, we have, so what is needed is not that the consumer solely takes responsibility for consuming sustainably. So we have the whole, this panel represents all different parts. So we have the action parts with the companies that get involved, and we have the research that is now backing us. And as Afton said, finally we get the momentum as well with policy and with the communities to take action. So this is really amazing. But what I think Marie sort of touched upon is also with food, that if you change your food consumption, you can solve a lot of different problems that we have, and we can go further to refugees. Do you have can anyone sort of answer, like, what other, you mentioned the 27% of climate impact, but what other things are important to communicate to the consumer that are solutions for other things than just the climate impact?
Maybe I can start.
Yeah.
But just a very brief sort of comment to say what I was mentioning before as well on the environmental side. So what we choose to put on our plates really is also very much to a large extent impacting biodiversity, for example. So if we choose to eat kind of meat, maybe from Brazil, where they have chopped down a lot of rainforest to have the livestock roaming around there, that is, of course, one of the ways that you can actually make an active choice when you're deciding what to eat to also protect species, because species loss is also something that we really need to connect to the climate agenda, I think. So putting nature higher on the climate agenda. And yeah, just the grains that are going to feeding livestock can easily be used directly by humans. Mm-hmm. And so we might not need all of the big land that we have sort of cultivated now to just feed animals, but we could actually use that land to feed ourselves more effectively, and thinking about food security in the future as well. So
great, thank you. Amanda, you wanted to
Yeah,
comment?
so I was working on the Eat Lancet Commission report, which was a global analysis of how our food systems are doing around the world. And I think one of the new or novel parts of that report was really looking across a range of environmental indicators. So we do look at climate, but we also look at things like freshwater use or cropland use or nutrient flows or biodiversity, which has been very important. And I think that analysis really drove home that our food choices impact much more than climate. And it is this total environmental change that we need to be thinking about with food. But looking on the positive side of that, if we make some smart food choices, then we are helping to deliver on these positive impacts across the spectrum of environmental impacts. So I think that's a more positive spin to it. But then relating it back to the SDGs, of course, the FAO has done a great analysis that shows how food systems, not just consumption, but the whole food system, is connected to each and every single one of the SDGs. So I think some of them, like climate action, can be highlighted, but just recognizing how far-reaching the impacts will be when we change our food habits.
Great.
I think to build on that is, this is one of the few things in life where we have agency, or at least in this part of the world. And I think that that's really important to, as building on what Amanda and Maria had said, is that, you know, the science is there, and the knowledge is there to a great extent. And as people, citizens, we can act on this, and there's many things in life that we really can't vote directly. So voting with our forks, with our plates, is something that we've seen can shift markets. It can shift what is being produced. It can reformulate products. We're already seeing that happen here. So I think that is it's important to note that, and I think that's where we've gained a lot of momentum in the past years, and where we've seen evolution in food culture.
Yes, and maybe that's why as well that companies like Klimato can have both the science, because you use the RISE climate database, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to be a little bit controversial there, but sorry for that beforehand. But I think it is really important that you take this holistic approach, and it is really crucial to do that, because food is not just about the climate impact. It's not just about water usage. It's about holistic system. It really is. But I think one thing that we noticed when we work, because we work a lot with communication material and trying to try out different forms of actually, nudging or helping consumers, if you want to use that term more. And I think it is really crucial when you work with these kind of communication material that you really make it easily understood or easily understandable for the consumers making the decisions. Just to add to that, I think that's also a point we need to elaborate more on or examine more. Yeah.
Definitely, and that's something that there has been a definite gap between research and what we communicate to the normal consumer. And I think that with the Planetary Health Diet, or the Eat Lancet Commission report, it's trying to make it really easy for people to understand, and you have this solution, and then you're sort of coming up at the end of the chain with rescuing the food waste. So do you also have some kind of communication that are you trying to make more of an impact that you're actually rescued food? Are you taking any actions to impact your society?
Food waste is a very controversial subject when it comes down to corporate level, because no one wants to talk about what kind of food waste they have, what they throw away, when, and the value. So it's still, I mean, I'm 3 years in the company, but I'm still talking about companies who says, well, food waste, we don't have any food waste. We have biogas solutions for that. So they sort of equal throwing edible food away with the problem being solved by being turned into biogas, but I don't think that's enough. So I would say to consumers, eat what you buy. Yeah. Simple. But it's still 1/3 of everything we produce is going to waste. And as many has been into, it's not just one thing. It's so many questions and so many efforts, materials, and values that are put into a banana, for example. It's not just the banana you throw away. It's the work effort, the planting of the tree, growing the tree, cropping, everything, the whole process. Banana ending up in your hand. That's a value that is being thrown away like nothing. So we need to understand that each food we put on our plate or in our shopping bag or our fridge has a long, long process behind it that we need to cherish.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that Tatiana mentioned that they have discussed that a little bit with food waste and companies having to perhaps monitor how much food they take in and how much food they throw away. And maybe that's something that policy could help with. Maybe Afton and Marie could comment on this.
Can I just first say
Yeah, sure.
I think it's very important that we also think critically about consumer information, because we know that there's an increasing kind of momentum and people really want to make the right choices. But I think thinking about not just how we communicate information to consumers, but actually how they receive it, and will they actually make a change in their everyday life decisions based on it. So I think just understanding that kind of knowledge action gap, so we know kind of what we have to do, but it's very difficult to make those decisions. So how do we make the good decision the easiest one to make? And that is where policy really has a role to play, creating food environments where it's a very difficult thing if you want to do like a wrong choice. So it's going beyond nudging, which can be a useful tool, but thinking more about the kind of structural elements of the environments where we are and when we make food decisions.
And I think there is that in our work at the Nordic Food Policy Lab, we've been looking at solutions that are what we would call soft policy. So it's and hard policy being taxes and bans, in the kind of where you're slapping someone on the wrist, or you're making something very difficult to do. But I think to kind of frame it in more a positive psychology way, what we've been finding through our work is that these efforts in terms of soft policy are harder to, in many ways, in terms of metrics to measure. But at the same time, they do have massive potential to change culture. And I mean, from, let's say, looking at how we enable more bottom-up movements to affect policy. This is something that we've seen a lot of in the Nordic region, and I think that is a huge lesson. And something that's come out kind of again and again in many discussions is that generally in the policy world, the reaction is based on based on information, based on citizen demands, based on a number of factors. But it shows that, and what we've seen in our analysis is that things do change, and that is really, I think, for many people, when we just look at how things are going in this world, reading headlines, I mean, it's easy to want to put your head in the sand, but if you kind of look over a 5-year time frame, a 10-year time frame, changes in behavior, there are promising things showing up. Small sometimes, but promising.
Yeah, awesome. Do we have a question, or?
Yeah, Tatjana has.
Yes, I have a short comment on this. I think that it is very important to work with consumers and to educate them, but policies matter as well. For example, nowadays it is very hard for many supermarkets and many restaurants to do anything with the food that is packaged and that has best before data. We need some change about this, because most of this food can be used for food sharing or for other purposes, but supermarkets cannot do this.
Does anyone want to comment on that?
Well, I think supermarkets can do something. Sorry, not on? I think that many supermarkets can do something if they wanted to, but they have a policy in-house saying they can't sell the food past best before date. But there is no laws in EU, at least, that prohibits companies from selling or donating food past best before date.
There's also just a quick comment, there's also some innovative ways of thinking about this best before date. So in Norway, they have something that is called best before but not bad after. And so just highlighting that even though a product has a kind of date where you're supposed to eat it before, it is usually good a few days after as well, and that the important thing is to taste it, to smell it, to figure out if it's good or not. So it's of course a food safety issue, because nobody wants to be responsible if a lot of people get sick when they eat food that is maybe gone bad. But just making sure that there's a kind of like information to consumers that they need to be like testing and trying out and smelling and so on.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that legislation around food waste has changed in recent years, and what we see, just giving an example from Denmark, but I think you see this in many other countries in the Nordic region, is that you can get food that has been discounted that is very close to the expiry date, and that is life-changing for many families who want to eat, healthy food, but it's unaffordable for them. So being able to buy something that's half price or discounted even up to 80% is really important, and they can buy it in a dignified way as well.
Yeah.
So I think that not just families, but also, I mean, anyone who wants to eat a healthy meal. So I think that these have knock-on effects, the changes in policy, and it enables kind of consumers to eat in more healthy and sustainable ways.
Yeah, definitely. And eating in a more sustainable and healthy way is the sort of whole point of the planetary health diet. But that looks very different in different contexts, even within one country. As you said, some families might, or some people might benefit hugely from a discounted food rescue item. Can you, Amanda, tell us a little bit about the Nordic?
Questions from the audience ongoing as well? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll get back to you with that question.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on this, the responsibility of policy. I recently read something about policies in the Southern Europe, maybe Italy or France, prohibiting food waste from, I think, supermarkets. Based on the story, like we cannot have a society where we throw away a third of food and at the same time have so many hungry people in the same country. So the legislation actually banned, and I think there's a fine for supermarkets if you throw away food. Is that something you know about or elaborate? Are there other countries following up that kind of, because it resonates with your sort of discussion?
Yeah. So France is one of the first countries who've tried this out, who've actually said that it's prohibited to waste food, and you need to actually also donate it to, I think, food banks. I think that's the kind of the deal there. I think in the Nordic countries, the tendency within food policy is to work more closely in public-private partnerships. So rather than putting a ban on supermarkets or companies, it's more about working in partnerships to improve the standards and to improve the kind of raise the bar. So it's just a bit of a different, I think, culture in how you make policy. Do you put like the politicians here and then the companies there, and then you have a fight, and then you set some standards, and maybe the companies don't want to do it. So it's a bit about more collaboration, I would say, in the Nordic countries. So there hasn't been those kind of policies implemented here. It's been suggested, but none of the countries have implemented those things.
Okay, do we have any other questions in the audience for now? No? Great. Okay, then Amanda, I was going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about the planetary health diet and what that means in a Nordic perspective or a Nordic context?
Yeah, sure. So the whole point behind the planetary health diet was to give us some sort of guidance on how we can eat that both supports our own individual health, but also supports the health of the planet. And I think the really good news is that your choices often can help both of those at the same time. So, of course, there will be some trade-offs, but what it says, particularly in a more Nordic context or high-income country context, would be low to moderate amounts of animal-sourced foods. So for many people in the Nordics, that would mean drastically reducing their meat intake. We're about 9 times over the Eat Lancet limit here in the Nordics. Mm-hmm. It would mean increasing our plant-based proteins, but also getting a rich diversity of plant-based proteins. So branching out to some of those things that aren't quite part of traditional diets here, like legumes and nuts and those types of things. It also means limiting sort of foods high in sugar. So these foods don't have any health benefit, the really sugary snacks and those types of things, yet they're still taking these precious resources to produce, so we could really be cutting down on those as well. So those are some of the main implications, I think, for the Nordics.
Great. Does anyone have a question about the planetary health diet, or? Yeah?
I think it was just in relation to earlier, but there was also a question at the lunch talk about how do we incorporate people that are less off, who maybe don't understand like the severity of the context about the sustainability and the food system. So I think it's a question feeding into like policy making, changing diets and so on. Like, how do we sort of get people on board that are kind of resisting? All they look forward to is the steak at Friday evening, and doesn't understand like the bigger picture. Like, how can we get them on board, so to speak?
Yeah, I think there's several things that we can do. So one, and it's already been mentioned. So I'm not so much a fan of personal responsibility. I'm more the fan that you just have to make the best choice, the easiest, the most affordable, the most attractive choice. So I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done at the systemic level to just make sure that those choices are available. But then I think there's a lot of work that can be done by food service, by procurers, to show that when you shift your diet, it can be really tasty, because I think that's what a lot of people base their choices on. Well, we know taste and price are two of the biggest ones. So if there are examples everywhere you go of not a healthy and sustainable meal, that's sort of known to turn people off unless they're really invested in that already. But just to show that there are these tasty meals, and oh, by the way, they happen to be healthy and sustainable, I think that can really help shift people over as well.
I think since Climato is working mainly with restaurants, they should all be tasty, right? Yeah, the meals. Exactly. But you can maybe comment on how to get people on board, and then I have another question for you after that.
No, I was just thinking, I think it's also equally important to make these decisions fun and engaging. And I think there are companies that have managed to really do that, like Karma or Food Loops. There are a lot of examples of companies selling crickets as a way to introduce it. And I think it can be quite important as well to not forget that these are, we're ordinary people, and we need to get excited about things. And I think certain examples and certain companies have managed really well with that. I think that is also important to include when you discuss these kind of things. To include more sort of fun way, and not necessarily giving the responsibility and putting all the responsibility on the individual, but rather, in a new, innovative way. I think that's important as well.
Yeah. Other questions?
Can I just add something onto that as well?
Sure.
So I think it's working now. So there's been some really interesting research that's coming out of the World Resource Institute and looking at language and how we actually describe food options. So generally, as we've seen in the past, it's changing now, but you would have a vegetarian option, vegan option in like a little box at the end of the menu, or maybe on the back side, hidden away, or you'd have some kind of demarcation that this is vegan or it's vegetarian. And we know that doesn't work for most people, because not everybody feels like they should, subscribe to that categorization. And in order to bring more people on board, actually just changing language is making a huge difference in these studies that have been going on in major canteens in different parts of the world, and mostly in the Anglosphere. But I think you would see the same effect here, and to realize that flexitarianism, reducitarianism is going to have a much broader appeal than something that is much narrower, let's say, than that is equated with sacrifice for many people. So that I really see that kind of language is increasingly becoming more important in bringing more people on board, and the way we talk about food, the way we advertise food, and the way we promote certain things. So not just that it's healthy and sustainable. Most people are not choosing based on those criteria, as Amanda had said.
Yeah.
It's just as a comment, because I think it's exactly touching what you're talking about, Afton. So what are people basing their choices on? Because I think you can go a long way if you make it more interesting, more fun, more healthy. But I think maybe you could argue that you're forgetting an important perspective, is that also so dairy and meat, but especially the meat, is some kind of symbol for something, well off, something nice, something that the higher society, if you have money, you can buy meat. So isn't there something like a link that we kind of maybe are missing in that sentence, that also that meat is linked to sort of privilege in some way, and suddenly if someone say I cannot buy meat, and now I have to buy vegetables. So isn't there something like a culture of how we look at the symbols of food, if you understand what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I mean, you see this in terms of the data. So a report that just came out by Mælketuren, which is Denmark's kind of autonomous think tank on food culture. And so it sits under the Ministry of Environment and Food, but they kind of act as an independent entity. So one kind of stark kind of result from that analysis that they've done on Danish people's eating habits is that it's the highly educated women living in cities who are most likely to cut their meat and dairy consumption. So again, how do we reach out to those who don't fall in those categories? Because the further you move away from the city, the harder it is to change your dietary habits. We see there's a lot of food deserts as well in the countryside, despite there being food production. And access to healthy and sustainable food might be more difficult. So again, how do we shift those statistics? And I think that is having that access to those numbers is a start, because we haven't traditionally gathered that kind of information on a national level before. And other countries are doing that now too, but again, statistics can put this on the policy agenda. And we've already seen that in terms of the reaction by the Minister of Food in Denmark, saying that we can see that Danes need help to actually make the right decision. And so now the ministry will be providing tools, subcontracting this autonomous organization to actually come up with ways to really help people. And I'm really curious to see what that will look like, because this just happened like 3 days ago. So that is a huge shift in terms of political response. And again, without the statistics, without the science, it's very hard to act, and it's hard to put this on the agenda. So extremely important kind of detail to add in there.
Yes, and it's also very important for those who are sharing this information, who are providing the information to the consumers. They have a responsibility to make it clear and not mislead. That's something that I'm sure you know as a nutritionist. But I was going to ask Climato, going back to what Amanda said about sugar, for example, it's not a very, like, climate-wise, it doesn't have, if you compare it to other foods, it doesn't really have a big climate impact. So have you encountered any problems with that in your company with marking something as very climate-friendly, for example, a sugary cake or something, but then there's a lot of other adverse effects on that food? So how do you handle those tricky situations of your labeling system?
Yeah, so first of all, we label meals, whole meals, so not individual ingredients. Mm-hmm. And then what we also do is that we give restaurants a tool where they can measure and calculate and receive reports on their total CO2 emissions. So it's not that we're so much nitty-gritty on specific individual ingredients, just to have that clear. Yeah. And then on the second thing, we do run into that. In many cases, larger food service providers already have some sort of nutrition calculator, or they know the nutritional value of their food, of their foods. But what they've missed is having an overview over the carbon emissions. Mm-hmm. But with that being said, it is of course something we run into, especially when you talk to people who have a little bit more knowledge than the average person, mm-hmm. that it might be undercutting a lot of other important measures and mm-hmm. a lot of other important KPIs. Mm-hmm. And that's of course something that we in the future want to work further on. Yeah. But I think it's important to first figure out how can we actually communicate in the best ways, both to the restaurants as a whole entity mm-hmm. and also to the consumers. So that's what we're working on right now. Yeah. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to account for more things.
Yeah, of course.
I think in all of this, everything we want to achieve with a more healthy planet and healthy people, communication is key. If you can't communicate it right or make a food look appealing or a text on a packaging sets the product, no one's ever going to buy it.
No.
And I have lots of food waste in my bag. And when I say food waste, people often react and say, oh, is it like gross, or is it scraped off a plate, or is it rotten apples? And when I show them what food waste is, people go, oh, are you going to throw that away? No way. So I think it's important to also, when you use words, food waste is very tricky.
Yeah.
Because it associates with
yeah.
rotten stuff, and that's the complete opposite. That's why it's food and waste. It's
I'm sure that's
acid.
why the juice rescue isn't called waste.
Yeah, no, so
it's
tricky.
Yeah.
If you talk about food waste or healthy food or green food or no meat or whatever you want to communicate, it sets off thoughts.
On that note, on communication, I just want to ask one last question before I give over to Jonas, and that is, a lot of the times I at least get the question, well, it doesn't really matter what I do because I'm just one person, so why should I change any of my habits? I'm sure no one in this room thinks that way, but I've gotten that question. So can you just, if you feel like it, can you tell me what would you respond to that? Whoever can go.
Sure. Since that's a bit of what we're doing, I'll make you go at that. So I think that it's exactly what you talked about before, that if we stop having this narrative of being a particular responsibility that we put on people, but rather a narrative where you are actually the agent and you have the freedom to make a choice. And this is, if you consider yourself a climate activist or in any case care about social issues, this is your opportunity to actually make your own decisions. So it's more, I think it's more about the free choice and really enforcing that. Because I think in the end, that's what a lot of climate skepticists are against, that someone is trying to put something on them that they don't want in the first place. But then also, you can also enforce that if you eat a plant-based diet, you will decrease your carbon emissions by about 80%.
Yeah.
Just to add.
Yeah. Good answer. Marie, do you want to
just to say that I definitely think that it makes a difference, and it might feel like you're alone in doing something, but I mean, we're looking in the Nordic countries now and we're seeing that among youth, we have about 30% more or less in the different Nordic countries that are turning to flexitarian diet for animal welfare reasons, for climate and environment reasons, or for health reasons, among both youth, sort of young people and millennials, if you think about the broad group of people. And that is really affecting both how companies are behaving, the kinds of products that they want to offer in the future. If they want to stay viable as a business, they know that they will need to change their offerings. It's changing what policy is doing. It's taking a bit of time. It's not there yet. But this kind of new demands from a new group of consumers who are going to be the ones kind of determining food policy in the future. This is really, really key. So making these different kinds of changes in your everyday life, when you do it 3 times a day, it really makes a big difference.
I think it's also important to just understand the history of social change. I mean, again, we've seen that governments have been brought down, that we've seen radical shifts in the way that we look at social inclusion. We've seen shifts in the way that we see certain groups of people as members of society change over time. So again, I mean, these are often started by a single person who then was able to lead. And, whether it's the climate emergency or whether it's dietary shift or, whether it's other kinds of social causes, I think that, again, just history tells us that a single action or a single person can actually change the world. And that's not just a cliche. I mean, there's very good kind of historical figures behind that. So I just always look at my own kind of myself as a personal experience in this. When I was in high school, I became a vegetarian, the only vegetarian in my high school. I was weird. And, I'm 32 years old now, and I look amongst, my peers, I look amongst people who are older than me, younger than me, and this has become much more normalized in society. As before, I was definitely preparing food for myself, and it was kind of alienating. But now I can just walk through the doors here, and there's a vegan, restaurant right available to everyone who works here. I mean, that has changed, and that was 15 years ago. So again, I think it's one person can make a huge difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much. And I will now give over to Jonas, who will moderate the more policy-oriented.
So before we go in, I want to go back to Madrid and ask Tatiana, because we've just been in the briefing here at 6 o'clock, we were told that most people might feel disappointed in the progress at COP25 at the moment, which frankly isn't that surprising, but that's just how it is. And you also mentioned there's pretty much no food policy being discussed at the COP25, because that's not the theme. But as our panelists just told, the whole idea and the subject is holistic in nature. So have you spotted any possible legislation or any idea of policy making that could affect the food industry without directly intending that to be so?
Sorry, I'm not sure that I understand your question correctly, so could you please repeat it once again?
Any policy making in discussion right now that could influence or that could have an effect on the food industry without that being actually the intention to start with?
Well, I'm not sure. Maybe the food industry should start from working better with food waste. I'm not sure whether it is a highly controversial topic for Nordic countries, for European countries, but for my country, where I come from Russia, it is very important, and we need both policymakers for that and companies, and so that they could work together on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, back to the panelists. I want to ask you, the power of policymaking or legislation. We see in the discussion with Brexit, for example, if they leave the EU, then they will have to, if they want to stay in the market and sell their products in the European Union, they have to either sell them, they have to still succumb to the laws that we've made in the EU. So by that, they have to also follow the food policies that we make. They can't just sell poorly produced chicken meat that is cheaper to make because they'll not be imported to the European Union. So it seems like legislation has the power to actually change not only what we can eat, but what we have even option to actually buy in our countries. Why is that not a more common thing? Is it because it's difficult for nationwide policies to make that shift? Is it too different from what you're used to as a customer? Or what's the issue here?
I'm not sure I understood the question. Sorry.
Okay.
It's a big question.
It's a big question. Let's drop it down a bit.
Yeah.
So the actual power of legislation. Why is it we don't make more food policies that change the behavior of our people and customers? As you know, in Denmark we have this famous or infamous sugar tax, where you can buy a kilo of sugar or a kilo of candy for more than a kilo of chicken meat. That was discussed very much, but also lowered the amount of sugary diet you will eat. Why don't we make even more policies that change the way that people are allowed to eat through financial,
I think it's just the way that food is so personal, and the way that food policy really easily gets, to annoy people. People don't want to feel like someone is dictating what they eat on a daily basis. We want to have the freedom to choose the kinds of food products that we have, because it's connected to emotions, it's connected to taste and deliciousness and all of those things. And just having that kind of top-down decision making on what food choices that we make is very polarizing in the conversation. So policymakers are generally very sort of they're not so keen on doing very sort of strong political action within this space, because they are fearing a backlash from consumers, of course, who are going to be the people who vote in the next election. All of these things are kind of, maybe on a 4-year basis important. But then also fearing a backlash, of course, from the industry and from the companies who are perhaps the ones who have to take on these, reformulating products or other things. And so that's often why, for example, in the Nordic countries, like Afton said before, it's more of this kind of soft policy touch, which sometimes means that you work more in collaboration with the industry, for example, so that you have some kind of agreement that, well, we will put this law, within 2 years we're going to implement it, so that you as a business have time to reformulate the product before the law comes into action. So those are the ways that the kind of dialogue with the industry is really important in the Nordic countries, and that there's this kind of trust between the business and the governments. So there's been examples of when these kind of harsher policy regulations have been put in place, for example, in Norway, where the government, with one hand, were saying we need these kind of partnerships to develop better products for people, but then they were also putting a tax on certain products. And just by doing that thing, they kind of got the backlash again, because they were saying, oh, but hey, we were trying to work with you as a government, we were trying to do our best, but then all of a sudden came this tax that nobody had kind of advertised before. So it's about finding that kind of compromise or dialogue between, I think, is what's happening in the Nordic context, if we look at it from this perspective. Then, of course, in other regions, they're much more harsh. We have sugar taxes in Chile and in a lot of other countries, and there it seems to be working quite well, and we see good results. So it's a matter of understanding context and where certain food policies might have an effect and where it might not.
Okay, so it's a cultural thing then, apparently.
I think it is, yeah. Policy making is very sort of cultural dependent or context dependent, yeah.
Amanda, you have a comment?
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. I think the popularity or unpopularity of certain decisions with lots of different groups of society is a major driving factor. But then there also are some more structural barriers, like a lot of different parts of food policy is decided at the EU level. So one country can't necessarily go ahead and do whatever they want to do. And you see, for example, when Sweden wanted to go ahead with dietary guidelines that incorporated sustainability more, then there was this backlash that it wasn't complying with EU regulations. When the UK has wanted to do a lot of progressive things around labeling and so forth, they found they really had to go this extra mile and put in so much extra energy, because then it was a back and forth with the EU trying to figure out if they were if they had some legal issues. So I think with the stretched resources of governments today, they're not necessarily always willing to put in that extra energy to find the loophole in some of these more EU policies.
Okay.
I also think, so it's interesting because we get kind of the example from on a national level, the supranational level, and how that affects also in terms of national policy. But I think also where there's a lot of kind of attention right now is around cities, and as a kind of looking as a subset of in terms of governance. And that's where you have a little bit more room for movement, because that, I mean, again, you're dealing with a smaller population. You have fewer kind of hurdles to jump in order to kind of pass some kind of progressive policy. So, I mean, what we've seen around the Nordic region and in many cities around the world is that you have city governments committing to fairly ambitious changes in terms of food policy. Giving an example from Finland, because I don't think we've named Norway and we've named Denmark and Sweden, and not yet Iceland and Finland. So we'll go to Finland. So this year in February, the city of Helsinki decided that they were going to reduce meat and dairy, the purchasing of meat and dairy in public procurement by 50% by 2025. And this, of course, many people welcome this decision, seeing that, you know, by the meals that are provided in schools and you know, Finland being a great example of a national school food system, but also in hospitals and other kinds of institutions run by public that are publicly run, that this could have a huge knock-on effect, because at least maybe one meal would be a bit more climate friendly. But of course, you get the backlash as well. There was kind of a famous quote. One kind of advisor, political advisor, he said, "Oh, I mean, this is communism. This is, you cannot tell people or what to do." So, and of course, we've seen backlash in other Nordic countries, and this is expected again. People, this is, like as Marie said, this is tied to identity, emotion, all these kinds of things. So it is to be expected, but I would say on a city scale, it's a little bit more manageable. And that's kind of a great thing because cities, when we look at food policy, it can influence national politics as well. So there is hope. And cities as testbeds is a really great place to start. And I think that's also what we are seeing in our work is around city and food governance is quite exciting.
Okay, interesting. And Elin, do you have a comment on what Amanda said? Or?
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking that media also plays an important role because scopes or things happening or poison in fruit or whatever can make both companies change their policies quite quick and also raise awareness and fast forward policies on a national level and I suppose also on a EU level as well when it comes to what kind of food we import or export and produce.
Okay, so it sounds like then the biggest issue with policymaking is people don't want to be nudged that hard in their personal life, which their food diet and their customs is a big part of. So what do you do then? There's a discussion about what is it we want? Do you want people to eat more healthy, or is it because we want people to eat more sustainably? And then how do we target that without punishing their behavior? Do we then lower the price of the good thing so it becomes economically favorable and just gets we nudge the the shift in our culture, or do we just keep on raising the prices of meat and then we gotta punish people? I mean, there's two different ways to do it. Like, have you any experience in that? What are your experiences with when people are consumers or businesses, they try to change the prices or the nudging, so to speak?
Well, I just think in terms of getting a sustained change, we know that you often have to eventually change social norms. So I think unless you're trying to take people along with you and just going the sort of command route, then you might see some change, but I'm not sure how sustained or deeply embedded that will be. So I think there hasn't really been an example worldwide of shifting large segments of populations into a healthy and sustainable diet. We've certainly seen major shifts into an unhealthy and unsustainable pattern. But I think what the science tells us is, even if we don't know the exact actions, it will be everything. So we do need to use every approach that's possible. So that means taking people along with you by, for example, integrating this into formal education, so it starts to change those cultural norms. So, and then using more potentially hard regulation to change food environments, so that those options, as we've been saying, are just the easiest and most attractive options. And then maybe using even harder policy to regulate businesses and what they can advertise, for example, or setting prices. So I think we do need to keep our mind open to every possible policy lever. I think that was one of the main conclusions out of the Eat Lancet, that we pretty much need to do everything we possibly can as fast as we possibly can with everyone we possibly can.
The top-bottom approach.
Yeah, all of them actually. So, yeah.
It's very interesting. So you didn't talk about what a policy you could do where you can punish something is tell the companies how they are marketing their food, because then you don't directly go to the consumer or to the individual. Then you more go on a like a company level, and you change their behavior, so you don't feel it as much as a nudging for the consumer.
Exactly. So you might think it's slightly annoying if you love eating meat or dairy or candy, to walk in and only see advertisements for these beautiful fruit and vegetable scapes in stores. But it's not as if it's this nanny state telling you, well, we're advertising this and you have to buy this, and this is the only thing that will be available in our store. So that is one thing that could happen, but of course, just keeping in mind that this will probably need to be coming from all angles.
Of course. And
yes.
And before we end, because we are almost out of time, I just want to ask, is there any question left in the audience? Any burning last ask? There we have a question right there.
Yeah, I just, we spoke a lot of communication and policy, but I also wanted to know what you think about like technical innovation within the food field, because we didn't talk about that at all. Like, is there any hope, or what are you looking forward to, and what about policies that can allow rather than ban things? I'm thinking of allowing sales of insect-based food, for example. Would be interested to know what you think about that.
Again, technology is a pretty big word as well, because, you know, a pen can be a technology as well. So I think when it comes to some of the things that are quite exciting right now, and where we can advise better policy making is around data. And there's so much information out there, and I think it's we've kind of mentioned that. Well, there's a ton of information. We need to find better ways to funnel that information to the right places, and to make the right decisions. So how do we actually handle mass amounts of data? So one kind of big thing that is being talked a lot about in different kind of progressive policy spheres is around big data and how that comes into better policy making. But then in terms of technological fixes, I think Amanda will also be able to give a better comment on that, but it can't just be 100% technology. If we're looking at, for example, some very kind of high-tech solutions to sustainable food production, it has to be a dietary change as well. It has to be reductions in food waste. I mean, these are things that we can do tomorrow, or actually tonight. And some of these technologies are ideas as opposed to actually things that are in use today. So I think it's like not kind of being totally starstruck by technology, but realizing it does have an application.
That would be exactly what I say, is that if technology wants to, if we want to support technology as an option and let those who are already in this field run ahead, great, because we're going to need all options that we can. But then on this global level, through our Eat Lancet analysis, really noticing that unless we do dietary shifts, improvements in production, and food loss and waste, unless it's all three, not just two, there's no pick and mix here, it's all three, or we won't reach our health and environmental targets. And we also found that technology does mean just implementing a lot of the knowledge and practices that we already know about that work, particularly on the global scale, that could happen. So I think really broadening out what technology means and what tech solutions are could be very valuable and potentially quite attractive, because if we already know the solution, they're not going to be super expensive for governments and things like that. So I think there is a good possibility if we do look at this in a broader sense.
That's a good comment, and because we are out of time, but I want to ask, is there any last final comment from Madrid before we say thank you for the evening?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much for this session, and I hope that it will the importance of food consumption and food waste in terms of the negotiations in Madrid. And I hope that the participants of the COP25 will pay attention to this problem, because, of course, this is a very important issue for climate change. And, of course, we shall talk not only on fossil fuels and NDCs, but on food consumption as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, panelists, for joining us in this event. Thank you for coming. And do you have...
Thank you, and thank you for being moderators. And as we finalize this, I just want to say, remember that be active on social media. That goes for all of you. And for you who are here in Stockholm and you who are there in Madrid, remember that you are super climate heroes. We have these very nice, now I don't know if the camera can follow, for example, there behind Jonas, we have Dr. Change, and over there we have the goalkeeper. So take pictures of yourself and spread them all over the world. That is why they're here. And remember the hashtag. And thank you for this evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.